It's an experience I underwent a few days back. There's a tennis court next to my house, which it's a concrete, and um, after every rain, when there is some sunshine, we see lots of dead earthworms there. So what happens is when it rains a lot, all the earthworms try to escape the waterlogged soil, I guess, and try to crawl onto the concrete. And once the sun is up, they are not able to move quickly enough and in the right direction. So they get they die basically because it gets too hot. So anyway, the other day I had taken my son to the court to play just after it had rained, and there were lots of worms, and the sun was just coming up, and I think there were at least 100 worms on the court. And uh, so my first thought was, okay, how do I get them out of the court? And I quickly got overwhelmed, and then I decided to just go by what my heart says rather than what I should be doing according to an agenda. And so I thought, okay, let me just pick a few earthworms, put them aside, uh, and then I'll decide what I'll do. And once I start doing that, obviously I have a son who is uh, close to a year and a half, so he wants to do everything that adults around him are doing. So he's going around trying to uh, pick worms, and obviously it's not going to work. His coordination is not well enough. So I'm trying to handle both, and it it it, again I got quickly overwhelmed, um, and once I did get a worm and try to put it away, it will wriggle and fall back, and I have to keep doing it, and that was also frustrating. And I was really hoping to lean on my practice to see if I could get any intuition or insight, but it just everything was just um, messed up. I decided to give up and just take my son away to minimize the damage, because when he runs around, he wasn't paying attention, so he might be. But sure enough, the next day I come and the whole place is full of dried up dead worms. It's kind of sad, but
Yeah, sorry for it. The situation is a little funny. Earthworms dying is not particularly funny to me.
I mean, I was able to notice that I came up with all kinds of rationalizations to not do it, because I think it the act was I think it was constantly um, getting clear that I will not be able to uh, help them, or not even all, but most of them. And the brain kept coming up with rationalizations that um, maybe they're meant to die, or maybe they'll reincarnate, or maybe all those silliness.
It's not silliness. I mean, it might be silliness, but they're meant to die. I mean, meant is a little funny. It's implying a human thinking process, but that it's part of the natural order that they die is true and important to recognize. So first thing I would say is, usually I speak with a lot of space. I like that better. I like just sitting and letting the words come and having a lot of silence. And I think it works in a group like this. But I listened a little bit to some of the YouTube things the other night, which I don't usually like to do so much, but it's too much space for YouTube. So I'm going to try to talk a little more full. So, for one, your practice was working, so don't feel discouraged. like I've said before, we should trust that our intention is there. We hear talks, and we sit, and we practice, and it's changing us, and it's there. We don't have to think about leaning on it so much, or reaching back and grabbing for our practice and bringing it to the situation. It's already in us, so we can relax about it a little bit. If we consciously think about it, that might be helpful, but we don't have to worry so much. So your decision to leave at one point was, I think, wisdom. You were like, this isn't working, my thinking mind is causing problems, so let's leave the situation. But that overwhelmingness is we can be sure, and I'm suggesting this, so you have to verify in your own experience, but we can be pretty sure is attached thinking. Ideologies about the self and the self's responsibility, and how we're supposed to change the world, and what an ethical person is, and it's all our thinking, which, again, for mundane purposes is sometimes useful, but generally it won't bring us to the deepest wisdom or the deepest truth that's beyond our thinking. So if we're getting overwhelmed, we can be sure it's that. The situation isn't so overwhelming. The situation is just what it is. You have to accept the situation. Your heart joyfully wants to move some worms, so joyfully move some worms. At some point you'll notice this isn't joyful anymore because it's too much and I can't do it, and I'm getting frustrated, and I'm going to feel guilty, and I'm going to be thinking about whether I'm a good person. So I have this, as all of you know, with sometimes with garbage picking up, right? So it's the same kind of thing. Each time it's a little thing, so it can be easy, but then your mind is like, oh, that's going to stay there, and it's causing problems, and it's toxic, and it's part of this whole worldwide problem with plastic everywhere, and I should do something about it, and that would make me a good person, and if I don't do it, maybe I'll be not a good person, and this rationalization, maybe I shouldn't do it because I'm doing it too much, and you just get lost in thinking, and it's just not helpful. So sometimes even you recognize it's not helpful and you can't stop. I've been in that situation, of course, many times, but at least you should start recognizing this is not a healthful situation. This is not necessary. Because true health and true beauty, creating beauty and participating in beauty and sharing beauty in the world, comes from a place of joy and ease. If it's not a place of joy and ease, there's something wrong. Something wrong, not ultimately wrong. It's all part of a natural process, but it's something restricting and limiting in you that can be released into more freedom and more beauty. There's a little quote from Sawaki Roshi: "If it weighs on your mind, it's wrong." He had these really short phrases. I mean, I don't know what they were in Japanese. That's the translation, but he was supposed to speak very bluntly. So that's a great summary. If it's weighing on your mind, you're making a mistake. We think if it's weighing on your mind, maybe we're working out some important moral idea, but no, it's just a mistake. It's just attachment. Let it go. So earthworms die. That's what they do. We think we understand earthworms and they're suffering and they're not suffering, but we have no idea. We're just making that up. It's our projection. It's even true with other people most of the time. It's our projection. Maybe we can empathize with what someone's feeling, but a lot of times it's our own idea of what we think they're feeling, what they should be feeling. And that's for other humans, let alone other creatures that we don't understand. They might not be, they're not suffering as far as we know in the sense that we usually suffer in terms of mental anguish and confusion. They might be having pain, they might not. And if they do, it's brief. And what they are as awake beings, to the extent that they're awake beings, it continues. It just changes form. So, if we hold on to it's wrong when things die, we have a big problem because things die. That's what happens. We have to let it happen. And of course, if someone's about to be hit by a car, you try to save them. But if you can't, then you have to accept it. Let alone earthworms, we have to accept it. We're going to step on them. We're going to kill a lot, and they just die. And if we spend our time trying to save them all, obviously we can't save earthworms all, but anything, even other humans, it's futile. We're trying to make the world in the model of our mind, but our mind is deluded. It's always deluded. The universe is manifesting through perfect nature. Perfect not according to someone's mind scheme, but perfect because it's what is. It has to be that way. The idea that we're making choices and we can mold it and change it is an illusion. We are part of what's creating it all. So it's not like a separate thing acting on us and we're like slaves or something. We're part of what's making it all. But it's not according to my mind or your mind or anyone's mind.
But it's when you witness suffering and when you witness suffering and when you witness what appears to be suffering, and it's questionable whether you can affect change for the better. I think it's natural that you want to explore the possibility. I'm not phrasing this very well.
No, that's good. What I would say is try to keep it a response of your heart, whatever that means to you. Meaning, don't let it get caught in complicated thinking. That's where the problems arise. So yeah, when I see an earthworm squiggling on the ground, I bend down and pick it up and throw it on the earth. That's natural. But if you give yourself a project, I got to do this now for the whole block, or the next 10 blocks, and I'm going to put aside the rest of my... you can see it's no longer the heart. It's now the thinking and planning and judging what's the moral thing, and then you're lost, So we have to see what the balance is. So we check in with what feels joyful and when does it start to feel like a burden. That's the key. That's when it's switching over. When does it feel like a burden, an obligation, a duty? When is it weighing me down? And Sawaki Roshi says, if it weighs on your mind, it's wrong. If it weighs on your mind. If it doesn't feel like a weight, go ahead. When it starts to feel like a weight, let it go. Step back. Because it's left your heart and it's gone to your head. That's a good
rule of thumb.
Yeah. And I'm not saying the heart is good and the head is bad. The head has its role, but the head shouldn't be in charge of compassion. That's the problem. The head is in charge of, figuring out an address or calculating how many cups of oats to put in your pot or whatever. But it's not in charge of what's compassionate. Your heart is, which is not something you have to figure or worry about. It's just something natural you feel. And you have to balance the sense of maybe there's suffering here with I don't really know. So really what you're feeling is you're suffering. You see those earthworms and you suffer. But getting all the earthworms off that court is not going to end your suffering, actually. Even if it temporarily feels like it does a little. You'll be suffering that whole length of time. The earthworms might not be suffering at all. And even if they were, it's their karma. You could, you will add to more karma. Just like when I'm picking up all that trash, I'm actually creating suffering for myself and people around me. Maybe for you it seems more ridiculous to pick up garbage, but for me, for whatever reason, it's more compelling than earthworms sometimes. Because the earthworms, both their living and their dying seem natural to me. Seem like not disturbing. Now, the plastic garbage is also natural. It's just harder for me to see that because of my conditioning, that's all.
Is it possible to practice compassion? Um, is it possible to, if you recognize that you are not as compassionate as, I mean, I know this is getting into comparison territory, but uh, you mentioned that the mind should not be involved in uh, deciding on practicing compassion.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if um, making a making an agenda to practice compassion uh, may it's
Yeah, it's the mind getting in the way. So I don't think you can practice compassion really. You can say after the fact, I was practicing compassion. The thinking mind says that, analyzing the past. But real compassion, when it arises, just arises. It's not an intentional thing. The mind that gives yourself a practice is kind of is an oppressor a little bit. I'm supposed to do this. You're not supposed to do it. What's possible is to trust yourself, your innate being, that compassion is there and it comes out. And you might say afterwards, "Oh, I was compassionate. That's nice." But then already the mind's making pride or something, which is kind of ruining it. Better is noticing other people practicing compassion and be like, "Oh, that's nice." You don't even have to tell them because then you'll rise a pride in them, right? But you notice and it's nice. Yeah. And it's not that we're not going to do anything in the name of compassion with some mental intention. We're going to do that sometimes, but we should recognize that it's a bit tainted and unnecessary and can cause problems if it gets too heavy. Lisa Cairns has a nice story she tells. She was always, as a young person, really into animals, but particularly into dogs. She had dogs and she loved dogs a lot. She always wanted to have a big, what's it called, like a shelter for dogs and stuff when she was a kid. And she's rescued dogs from the street in Thailand and stuff. But she mentioned after some clarity dawned for her spiritually, she saw a street dog in Thailand dying, right in the midst of dying. And it just looked so beautiful to her. The whole thing looked so beautiful. It was just like, the way she says it is like God, and none of this is meant literally, it's a metaphor, but God was holding this dog as it was dying in love and just letting it die, and consciousness passing on to something else. Consciousness changing form, awareness changing form. And it was all beautiful. Not like, oh, that's so sad, that's so wrong. That's clarity. So that's even a dog or even a person. Recently there's someone I know, not so well, I met her recently, but she just told me that her brother died. She's pretty young, probably someone in their 30s, of a heart attack suddenly, back in Korea. She's Korean. And, at first it's nothing much to say, oh, I'm sorry, whatever, but at some point you have to say, well, what beauty can we take from this? What can we remember about the preciousness of life? How can we let this go and accept it? Even with people, let alone animals and earthworms and so unnecessary cruelty, unnecessary killing is just should be easy to let go of, if we're not attached to this is supposed to happen and that's supposed to happen. If we let go of our ideas, I have to eat meat because of nutrition, these things that we've been able to let go of, and just habit, then there's a lot of unnecessary suffering and killing that we can let go of. But there's always going to be suffering and killing. It's just part of how it works. And we have to if we release into deep acceptance of that, we suffer so much less, and we can actually bring more joy to those around us. So it's beautiful to teach your son, hey, here's an animal that wants to be in the soil. Pick it up and put it there. It's also beautiful to teach your son, you don't have to do that. You also can accept. Both. He has to learn both. So you don't want to teach him to obsess, right? Some sects of Jains, who we can say maybe it's a little extreme. I mean, do you want to live your life always with a mask? Now we're all used to masks because of COVID, but so no creature comes in, and always brushing the ground in front of us so we don't step on anything. I mean, to see it once is it's nice, it's interesting and beautiful, but to spend your whole life doing and actually worrying about it, oh, did I step on something? Is that bringing joy to the people around us? Is that accepting the way that nature is? Things die and are reborn is wonderful in a very clear state. Suzuki Roshi once, this Zen teacher who started the first big Zen centers in California. He said you should be glad that you're mortal or you're going to die, because otherwise it'd be really hard to let go of this attachment to this one form. I'm paraphrasing something like that. Awareness doesn't want to always stay in the same form, even as a human, let alone a earthworm. I'm not saying humans are necessarily better or more evolved, but maybe a richer life in some way. But anyway, it doesn't really make sense to compare, but just like we don't want to stay in the same room forever. Why the same body-mind forever? No need to resist it so much. It's just what happens. So our heart wants to help and save and reduce unnecessary loss of life to an extent that's natural and easy. Not necessarily easy in terms of effort expended. I mean, being lazy and just lying in bed isn't a good thing. We like to spend effort, so that's fine. But mental anguish we don't need. So my experience with picking up trash is really good for understanding other people's mental anguish around all the different things people have, But if we're in awakening practice, then we still have our problems and our obsessions and our mental anguish, but we can recognize it, right? So if we believe that it's really right, then it's dangerous. Then we're not going to stop. We're not going to question it. We're not even going to try to get ourselves out of the situation. We're going to orient our whole life to that, whether it's, a political campaign that we become another oppressive government because we think we've got the solution to solving the problem. We become another kind of tyrant. Or whether we think it's right to make money and to control things and to get power because then we're going to fix the world. So there's a sense of trust that can develop where you recognize the most beautiful change in the world that our hearts want is a natural kind of change that just comes from people being clear and letting go of their attachments. And just kindness erupts and we just share it. But if it's a mental agenda that we're going to force other people into, we can see that there's big problems coming. That's the usual strategy that people try. I mean, both sides are a problem, right? To forcefully try to change things, and also to be totally cynical and be like, I'm not doing anything. Yeah. I mean, you can't not do anything. You're going to do something. So you can either do something that's beautiful or something that's just self-centered and doesn't feel so beautiful. But that's not good either, right? So to find that balance is not complicated. It might be difficult because we have strong habits that are not helpful, but it's not complicated. It's, when do I feel that weight? When do I feel anxiety about this? Then I'm off, and let it go. Letting go is always the way to stop that process, stop that chain reaction from continuing. Let it go and step back. Try not to do anything. I mean, again, you can't not do anything, but try to do something that's not attached to some goal, which sitting is a beautiful example of, right? Just sit, just breathe, just stand, just move. Just be present. We're so addicted to things that weigh on our mind being right. It's a wonderful teaching. If it weighs on your mind, it's wrong. We're so used to having things weigh on our mind. We think that's how you accomplish things. They got to weigh on your mind for a while. So that's a radical challenge to us all. Can we live without things weighing on our mind? Because naturally, that's more beautiful, much more at ease. Another way to think of it is can I forget? Am I brave enough to forget everything right now? Right? One of the main ways that things weigh on our mind, maybe the only way actually, is we think it's important to keep hold of our memories. Because those are the things that are going to tell us what we're supposed to do. We have to keep track of our story, basically, right? But to recognize, maybe it's in a... the same truck going around in circles. Maybe it happens during sitting because you're most intentional about trying to be present during sitting, but you might say to yourself, can I allow myself to forget everything right now? Really, to forget everything right now. I mean, you're not going to forget everything, but in that moment, you can let everything go. Can I live from just this fresh place that's just new and has no attachments to the past? Not even the past telling me what I'm supposed to do in meditation. What state I'm supposed to get in meditation. Just totally drop it. I forget everything. If you totally had no memory and you're just alive. That's a very clear, there's a great sense of relief and freedom when you allow yourself to be totally let go of memory and intentionality. You can feel any intention I have is some kind of oppression. I just get let go of it all. Even my spiritual intention. And just celebrate, not intentionally, but just naturally perceive what is, and it's just celebration. What arises if you really, not necessarily fireworks celebration, but an ease and a joy at the miracle of just this happening, when it's not attached to memory, and it's not attached to intention. And your son's more like that already, right? He forgets. You pick up a couple earthworms and then it's on to something else.
Yeah.
That's how the earthworms are too, even more. And I think without this idea, when there's actually that moment of death, it's a great release. If there's acceptance, the earthworms accept it. They probably don't have the brain capacity to conceive of non-accepting, so it's just accepted. But even complicated mammals, I think mostly, aside from humans, mostly accept. Don't have much non-acceptance going on, possibility. Humans have a non-acceptance possibility, and it causes lots of problems. All problems, let's say. All suffering. It's non-acceptance, really. There's pain, but that's not really suffering. Pain exists beyond acceptance or non-acceptance sometimes, but say non-acceptance is suffering.
But pain and suffering, they feel the same though.
They don't really, I think, if you give it closer attention. Certainly we know we suffer when we don't have physical pain, right? So that's obvious.
Right.
Lots of suffering when we don't have physical pain. Usually when we have physical pain, we have some level of suffering as well because we're not accepting the pain. But sometimes you can experience having pain and not suffering about it. It's okay. Not just sometimes, a lot of times. If it's very intense, maybe not. But actually, if it's intense enough, you also don't suffer because you're just...
Yeah, you're focused on it.
Yeah, you're just focused on it. So it's really separate things. It's true, a lot of the time when we have some level of pain, we have some level of suffering, but that's not necessary. And most of the suffering we have is not connected to pain, I'd say. Pain is just a sensation. And moving away from that sensation is healthful. But you don't need suffering to move away from it. If you touch a hot plate and your hand bounces off, right? You didn't suffer, really. There's no conception of suffering. It's just you move away from it. Now that's automatic. Maybe the signal doesn't even get to your brain, but we certainly do an excess of suffering in dealing with pain and in dealing with so many other things. So the beauty of your empathy, and you're a particularly empathetic person, particularly with animals. I remember we found that bird once, and you're like, I got to take it home. I couldn't leave it. The beauty of that is you seeing the connection between yourself and other beings. So you feel what other beings are feeling, or you think you feel what other beings. Anyway, you're open to those other beings. And a lot of people are not so. So that's beautiful, the openness. But the non-acceptance of death or suffering is not helpful. And that's a pitfall of a lot of empathetic people. Their brain gets involved, they feel the empathy, and then their brain gets involved, and I've got to fix this. You don't have to fix it, actually. You just do what your heart naturally can do joyfully, and then you have to accept what you can't do joyfully. For those of us who are very sensitive to these things, it's hard. We feel so much, and then our mind habitually gets involved trying to fix. So we have to learn how we can let ourselves feel and also accept. Let it come and let it pass through. And I think that story of Lisa's is very beautiful because she didn't ignore that dog. She felt love for that dog, but she didn't feel like she's got to keep it from dying. It was all love. It was all fine. The whole process was fine. This is an important subject, I think, for those of us, usually people drawn to spiritual paths, but particularly, I think, us, this group of people, and a lot of people I know who live radically different lives because we recognize how unwholesome the society is, and we want to go in a different direction. But we can get very caught in figuring that out and feeling this weight of responsibility and feeling this anxiety about acting the right way. And it's not helpful for us. It's not attractive to other people, It's natural. It's okay. It's not surprising. born into this challenging world where these challenging things are going on, and being sensitive to it. So we should also be compassionate with ourselves that we get caught in these questions and figuring and anxiety, but we've got to have the other side or we'll go crazy. We've got to recognize it's all okay. It's all natural. And it's all this one divine happening, actually. It's just a dream. It's just like being in a dream, and you're sensitive to the other beings in the dream when they're suffering. And that's a beautiful thing that you're sensitive to it. But also you have to be aware, oh, this is just a dream. I don't have to worry about it. It's okay. Suffering might really be being felt, but it will transform and change into something else. It doesn't last forever. And we can't really say much about the suffering of outside of our own body-mind. We're just projecting. So all we can really do is address the suffering we're feeling and trust that as we reduce the suffering we're feeling, we're reducing all suffering for all beings, because it's all connected. It's more than connected. We're all one being. We're all one awareness happening from different points of view, from many points of view, right? It can't really be understood by the thinking mind. But so reducing our suffering is reducing suffering in general. And that's all we can do. Otherwise, we're just pretending and projecting. And naturally, we have some empathy, and we can make our best guesses about someone else suffering, and we try to be kind and loving. But that just naturally arises. It just increases our own freedom. But when it is forcefully arisen through an idea, it increases our anxiety and we suffer more. So that's the quote for the day. When it weighs on your mind, it's wrong. Just one other thing I might note is when you bring things up like that, you recognize it at the time as some kind of spiritual issue, and you bring it up later at the group. So this is all practice happening. We should recognize that. Whenever we're reflecting on our challenging experiences from this fresh light, practice is happening, practice is working. It's nice to recognize that. Not worry so much. Did I get the right answer? Or did I make the right action? Or you just recognize this process is opening in its own way. And it's helpful to bring, I think, bring up some experience from the week that we've had. I could use some reflecting.